City fan, get ready, because what is happening behind the scenes at the club could completely change the direction of the next few seasons. There is a transfer bomb involving one of the most explosive forwards in the Premier League, an outburst from a recent signing annoyed with his lack of space in the national team, heavy backstage stories about the 2012 title, and even controversy involving one of the biggest prospects currently wearing the blue shirt. If you love this team and live every piece of news as if it were an Aguero goal in stoppage time, stay with me until the end, because every detail of this story connects in a way that very few people have realized. Imagine the following scenario: January approaching, the window about to open, rivals ready to pounce on any slip, and suddenly the information emerges that one of the most dangerous forwards in the league has a release clause that is perfectly accessible for a giant like City. It is not an empty rumor. It is not something invented on social media. It is a clause written into his contract, around $65 million ready to be activated in 2026. And guess who is already circling this opportunity like someone who can smell a goal? Exactly. The Manchester club that refuses to stand still while everyone else strengthens. The name keeping defenders awake at night in England is Antoine Semeno, Bournemouth and Ghana forward, a player who, over the last 2 seasons, has gone from being just an interesting prospect to becoming a constant nightmare for any defensive line. Under Andoni Iraola, he stopped being just another quick winger and turned into a complete attacker, strong, aggressive, with acceleration, change of direction, and most importantly, decision-making inside the box. The numbers help explain the hype. This season, he already has 6 Premier League goals, and that playing for a club that is not fighting at the very top of the table. When a player with this profile starts delivering so much at a mid-table side, the story almost always ends in the same way. A giant appears. At 25, Semeno is at his physical peak, with plenty of time to evolve tactically, and with a maturity that only comes after taking a lot of knocks in big matches. That is why, inside the corridors of English football, the feeling is that a move to a top-tier club is not a question of if, but when. And this is where City step in with force. After Hugo Viana arrived as sporting director last summer, the club went through a small, silent revolution in the squad. 7 new players came in, a dressing room practically redesigned, a more surgical recruitment profile, and an ability to snap up opportunities others allowed to slip by. Proof of that was the deal for Donnarumma on the final day of the window for something in the region of $26 million, a figure considered a masterstroke. With that recent track record, no one doubts that, if City see a real opening in the Semeno case, the club can act with the same coldness and speed. And let us be honest, as dominant as City are, there is one point that has been bothering the fans, the coaching staff, and a lot of people on the outside as well. The team still relies too heavily on Erling Haaland to decide matches. The Norwegian is a goal machine, but he cannot carry everything on his own. The pressure on the wingers and attacking midfielders has grown, precisely because the attacking output from the flanks has not been as consistent as the club would like. In big games, any lack of alternative in the decisive moments can cost a title. In that context, Semeno is almost the ideal antidote. He can play wide on the right, drift inside, attack the space behind the defense, make diagonal runs in behind the center-backs, and still help in the counter-press, something which is mandatory in a team coached by a manager obsessed with intensity. Imagine a front line with Haaland pinning the center-backs, Foden floating between the lines, and Semeno attacking the free space. Just by picturing that, you can already understand why so many people within the Premier League believe he is one of the players who best fit City's playing style today. But City are not alone in this race. On the other side, Liverpool are watching every move very closely, especially after being swept aside 3-0 by City themselves shortly before the international break. Feeling the difference in squad level on the pitch sparks a sense of urgency that makes any board speed up its plans. Tottenham also appear on the radar as a candidate, always on the lookout for players who can explode under a coach who likes aggressive football. With a clause in the region of $60 million plus $5 million in add-ons, as has been reported in the English press, the perfect scenario for an auction between giants is set. And here comes that detail that only those who really follow the market know how to read between the lines. Today, City's interest still seems to be at a more initial stage. It is not the kind of situation where the club are already sending documents, preparing medicals, and all the rest. But if Semeno himself, his entourage, and Bournemouth feel that January could be the right time to take a leap, the pressure can flip. Suddenly, it is no longer the big club going after him, but the player pushing for the move. And when that happens, the ones who are most prepared and most organized are the ones who benefit. Now I want you to put yourself in that situation as a City supporter. A 25-year-old player at his peak who has been tearing defenses apart over the last 2 seasons, ready to step up a level with a relatively accessible clause and interest from direct rivals. In your mind, is it worth investing around $65 million in this kind of profile or not? Would you rather see this lad arriving at the Etihad to combine with Haaland, or watch him on television wearing another big English club's shirt and, who knows, scoring against City in a head-to-head clash? Think about that and start forming your opinion, because this debate is going to heat up in the coming months. Leaving the transfer market aside for a moment and going on to the pitch itself, there is another story that touches on dressing room dynamics, player ego, the national team, and even planning for the 2026 World Cup. We are talking about Tijjani Reinders, the Dutch midfielder who swapped Milan for Manchester City in June and arrived with the status of one of the best signings of Hugo Viana's first window. He impressed straight away. He played well in pre-season, introduced himself in great style at the Club World Cup in the United States, and made it clear he had the capacity to adapt quickly to the club's level of demand. His Premier League debut was almost perfect. In a 4-0 win away to Wolves, Reinders controlled the midfield as if he had been there for years. He dictated play, sped things up when needed, slowed it down when the team required, and helped both in build-up and in defensive work. For many people, it looked like another undisputed starter had been born in City's system. Except, as football likes to remind us all the time, the script does not always follow logic. Soon after came defeats to Tottenham and Brighton, the team's level dropped, the same defensive problems reappeared, and suddenly, nothing seemed so simple. Since then, what we have seen is a City slowly reborn. The team put together a strong run, winning 11 of their last 14 matches in all competitions, getting right back into the fight at the top of the Premier League and putting themselves in a comfortable position in the Champions League group stage. But individually, for Reinders, the journey has been a little more winding. He has had high moments with important performances, but he also went through a dip in form, the kind that leaves any player doubting himself. And at a club of this size, any fluctuation is magnified. Pep, knowing the Dutchman's profile well, tried to manage this phase. In some matches, he gave him a run of starts. In others, he took him out of the starting 18th to ease the pressure. There were games in which he was the maestro, like the clash against Borussia Dortmund, where he left the pitch with 2 assists for Phil Foden and was crucial in the victory. And there were also matches in which he ended up dropped, such as against Liverpool, when he stayed on the bench and watched other names take center stage. He himself admits that this is part of the reality of such a strong squad, where no one has a guaranteed place. If the competition is already fierce at club level, the situation is no kinder with the Netherlands. There, Reinders has to fight for minutes with players of the caliber of Frenkie de Jong, Ryan Gravenberch, and other midfielders who already have an established place. In a recent match against Lithuania, he came on for just 16 minutes, but even in that short time, he managed to score a goal and provide an assist. However, instead of just celebrating the numbers, he let slip something that many feel but few say: the frustration at not getting more opportunities. He openly admitted he was annoyed and that he wants to prove he deserves to start. That honesty caught everyone's attention. On the one hand, it shows an ambitious player who is not content with being just one more in the national team squad. On the other, it makes clear that he feels the pressure of approaching a World Cup with limited minutes on the pitch, and you cannot ignore the direct impact that has on City. A player who returns from international duty, hungry, unsettled, tends to respond on the pitch with more intensity, more focus, more desire to make his mark, and that can be a powerful weapon for the manager in the internal battle for places. Inside the dressing room, a profile like that is almost a thermometer of the team's mentality. A player who, even at a gigantic club, refuses to accept a secondary role and wants to prove himself all the time, drags his teammates level upwards. Pep knows how to make use of that kind of energy. The expectation is that this positive irritation he showed with the national team will turn into even more consistent performances in a City shirt, especially now that the season is entering the phase when decisive matches start to pile up, both in the domestic league and in Europe. And here I pass the ball to you again, City fan. In your view, has Reinders already shown enough to start more matches, taking on a central role in midfield, or is the current rotation the right path, even if it sometimes feels unfair on someone who is clearly knocking on the door? Is it better to preserve the physical and tactical balance of the squad, or to bet heavily on a player who is clearly hungry for space, even if that means leaving other important names on the bench? Keep that question with you, because the next stories circulating about City also tie in with this theme of protagonism, pressure, behind-the-scenes dynamics, and decisions that change history. There is still the surreal story involving the 2012 title and the conspiracy theory confirmed by someone who was on the pitch, as well as the delicate situation of a French gem who, even shining in the blue shirt, is being told he might not have a place at the World Cup. All of this connects and helps explain how today's City are the result of decisions, details, and characters that go far beyond the 90 minutes. Remember I said all of this connects on a level way deeper than it seems? Now it is time to go back in time and revisit one of the craziest moments in recent English football history, precisely to understand why so many people still try to play down what City have built on the pitch. We are talking about that absolutely insane afternoon in 2012. When the Premier League title seemed to be slipping through their fingers and, in a matter of minutes, turned into one of the most iconic chapters of the club's modern era. But as the years went by, theories, insinuations, and even suspicions started to appear about how everything happened. And recently, one of the central figures from that day decided to throw even more fuel on that fire. Mike Dean, the referee in that match against Queen's Park Rangers, has officiated more than 550 Premier League games and has seen everything on the pitch, but to this day he still describes that encounter as one of the wildest of his career. Only now he has decided to reveal something he noticed in real time, and that in his view changed the dynamic of stoppage time. According to Dean, as soon as City equalized through Dzeko's goal, something happened that, for him, was completely outside the norm for a team that still had something at stake. QPR simply gave the ball back to City without showing any real intention of protecting the result, wasting time or breaking the rhythm of the match. Taking part in an interview program, Dean said he mentioned this into the headset to his fellow officials. He looked at his assistants and basically asked, "Are you seeing what is happening? They have just conceded a goal but gave the ball back as if they wanted City to attack again." The fourth official on that occasion, Neil Swarbrick, even warned him, saying something like, "Stay alert, something big is about to happen." And the rest you know by heart. The move develops, the ball comes inside, the pass is played, Aguero takes a touch, cuts inside and smashes it into the net. The stadium collapses in celebration, United supporters freeze in Sunderland, and the whole world finds out, the hard way, that City had just changed the history of the league. But the part that feeds the famous conspiracy theory comes precisely from that QPR behavior in the final minutes. Wayne Rooney, who scored United's winning goal that day and thought the title was in the bag, has spent years raising suspicions about the way the opposition behaved. He recalls that QPR had on the pitch several players with past links to City: Sean Wright-Phillips, Needham Onuoha, Joey Barton, some with a history at the club, others with tense relationships, but all of them, in one way or another, part of that universe. And on top of that came the fact that, when QPR realized they were mathematically safe from relegation because of results elsewhere, some players started celebrating even before the final whistle. Imagine the scene. City desperately chasing a goal, the clock exploding in stoppage time, QPR theoretically still involved in a direct fight against relegation, and, even so, some of the visiting players celebrating survival on the pitch while the game had not yet finished. Jamie Mackie, according to reports, already seemed in party mood even before Aguero's final strike. Today, when a team is winning away from home and still has something at stake, what you normally see is the ball being hoofed out, players going down on the turf, slow substitutions, time wasting, anything possible to kill the rhythm. But that afternoon, QPR simply gave the ball back, dropped deeper and left space. This is where the City supporters' perspective comes in, from those who lived it in their skin. For those who love this club, what was etched in memory was not any theory, but the feeling that, for the first time in a long while, the team had built something big enough to break the narrative that only one side of Manchester could be champions. That goal was not just a shot from inside the box, it was the symbol of a turning point in the history of English football. City, who had previously been treated as mere supporting cast, became the protagonist. The team that decides titles in stoppage time, that refuses to lose, that turns an ordinary afternoon into legend. And perhaps it is exactly for that reason that so many stories, theories, and comments appear to this day trying to cast doubt over that achievement. When a club changes the hierarchy of football, it touches pride, narratives, and the memories of a lot of people. Mike Dean's remarks, by backing Rooney's version that there was something strange in QPR's behavior, reignite this debate. But anyone who watched that season knows that City's title was not born in 5 minutes of added time. It was built match by match, round by round, in a campaign where the team showed more than enough football to be champions with room to spare. Stoppage time merely chose the most dramatic way possible to tell that story. And this connects perfectly with the current moment. Just as back then many people underestimated City, today there are still those who look with suspicion at some of the players who wear this shirt. The difference now is that the club has a track record of titles, comebacks, and great performances to prove that you do not win by accident. And it is exactly this context that makes the recent controversy involving one of the most promising talents in the squad even more interesting, Rayan Cherki. Cherki is the kind of player you recognize in 2 touches of the ball. Left-footed, creative, unpredictable, developed in Lyons Academy, he has always been seen as one of the great prospects of French football. When City decided to invest around £34 million in signing him, many people interpreted it as a medium to long-term move. Bring in a young player with a very high ceiling to be polished in an environment of excellence. But what happened on the pitch was that he did not want to wait that long to make his mark. Even dealing with a thigh issue right at the start of his journey in England, Cherki began to string together performances that caught everyone's attention. In 13 matches under Pep, he already has 4 goals and 4 assists. Very impressive numbers for someone who is still adapting to the physical intensity of the Premier League and the tactical demands at City. And it is not just about numbers, it is the visual impact. The feeling that something different can happen when the ball finds his feet between the lines, around the edge of the box, in that territory where the great players decide games. On the international stage, the story followed a similar path. On his debut for the French senior team, coming on for just 30 minutes against Spain in June, Cherki scored a goal and provided an assist, leaving a very strong impression on fans and analysts. It looked like the beginning of a consolidated journey in the blue shirt. This week he had his second start for France in a 4-0 win over Ukraine, reinforcing the idea that he is ready to take on the biggest stages. And then came the comment that hit a nerve with City fans. Raymond Domenech, former manager of the French national team, decided to give his opinion on Cherki's chances of going to the 2026 World Cup. Instead of recognizing the attacking midfielder's development and ability, he practically dismissed the possibility, stating that players like Kolo Muani, Coman, and Nkunku are currently ahead of him in the national team's hierarchy. Domenech even suggested that everything would depend on how many minutes Cherki gets for City, even if it is just 10 or 15 minutes per match coming off the bench. For many supporters, this sounded like underestimation. It is not that the players he mentioned are lacking in quality, far from it. The point is, how can you ignore what Cherki has delivered in such a short time? He has been one of City's most dangerous players between the lines, the kind of attacking midfielder who can change a game with a quick dribble, a vertical pass, or an unlikely shot. In the Champions League, he came off the bench to score the fourth goal in the win against Borussia Dortmund, rounding off a night in which Foden scored twice and Haaland got his as well. In the Premier League and the League Cup, he has already appeared in decisive moments, such as on his debut goal against Wolves and the late winner against Swansea. If you look at the bigger picture, you see a recurring pattern, a club that is constantly questioned, whether through theories about past titles or through assessments that downplay the impact of their new stars. Meanwhile, on the pitch, the players answer with performances, numbers, and unforgettable moments. It was like that in 2012, and it is happening again now with names like Cherki, Reinders, and possibly, in the future, someone like Semeno, if the transfer really goes through. Do you see how the stories fit together? On one side, there is always an external narrative trying to explain City's success as if it were the result of chance, help, favoritism, or strange things. On the other, there are players who live under suspicion, whether in their national teams or in public opinion, and who use the club as a stage to prove the opposite. Reinders fights for minutes with the Netherlands, but finds at the Etihad the environment to develop and show he can start in big matches. Cherki hears that he might not have a place at the World Cup, but responds by being one of the most dangerous midfielders in the squad. And when you look ahead to possible signings like Semeno, you see a very clear pattern of behavior. City look for players who are hungry, who have something to prove, who have the energy to enter a highly competitive system and raise the level. The club does not want just big media names, but footballers who can be decisive both on a Champions League night and on a tricky away trip to a small Premier League ground. People who are not scared by pressure, who do not hide in big games, and who understand that, at a club like City, every minute can define a career. In the end, what stitches all these stories together is the way the club has learned to deal with doubt and distrust. Back then, in 2012, they said QPR made it easy. Afterwards, they said City would not have the legs to stay at the top. Later, they questioned whether the team would be able to renew itself, rebuild the squad, change cycles, and keep winning. Today, the conversation is whether signings like Reinders and Cherki will have enough space, whether they will convince for their national teams, whether they will go to World Cups, whether potential transfers like Semeno are worth the investment. In all these situations, the definitive answer never comes from debates, but from what happens in decisive matches. That is why, as a City fan, you constantly feel you are at the center of a story in motion. It is not just about a stoppage-time goal in 2012, nor just about a release clause discovered in 2026. It is about a project that year after year brings in motivated players, takes on battles, answers theories with trophies, and turns suspicion into fuel. When you see a Reinders annoyed about limited minutes for his national team, a Cherki wanting to prove his worth for France, and a potential target like Semeno being chased by giants, all of this is part of the same thread. City as the place where these narratives meet, collide, and find their conclusion. Now I want to hear from you, City supporter. Looking at all of this together, transfer market, theories about the past, young talents fighting for space, and experienced players being questioned, what do you think is the club's biggest priority today? Strengthening the attack with someone like Semeno, giving even more prominence to players like Cherki, trusting names like Reinders to run the midfield, or simply allowing the weight of the shirt and of recent history to keep speaking louder? When you put all these stories together, Semeno on the radar, Reinders annoyed with his limited game time for the national team, Cherki being questioned even while delivering on the pitch, and the eternal theory surrounding the 2012 title, it becomes very clear that Manchester City live under a different kind of pressure. It is not just about being charged for results on the pitch. It is the constant need to prove, every single season, that what has been won is not a fluke, not luck, not favoritism. And it is exactly this context that shapes the profile of player the club look for today and the type of squad being built behind the scenes. Think about it with me. A team that have already won everything they possibly could in recent years could easily choose the comfortable path. They could sign only huge names, establish stars who carry hype on their own, just to keep the image of a gallery of superstars. But City, little by little, have adopted a slightly different approach. Of course, they still bring in big names, but more and more they bet on players who are at a stage of their career where they need to prove something. Semeno, if he comes, is exactly that. A forward who is tearing it up at a mid-table club, but who has not yet had the chance to show whether he can decide titles at the very highest level. Reinders is that too, a respected midfielder, but one who wants to establish himself at the elite level and become a reference point for his national team. Cherki, even more so, a French jewel who wants to show he can be much more than just a promising academy kid from Lyon. This kind of player has one thing in common: hunger. Hunger for minutes, hunger for a leading role, hunger for decisive moments. And at a club where no one has a guaranteed place, that hunger becomes daily fuel. It is what makes a midfielder fight for every ball as if it were a final, what makes a winger try that unexpected dribble, what makes a striker press the center back until the last minute, even when the scoreline already seems decided. And it is what, in the end, turns an expensive squad into a truly competitive one, where the fight for places is as intense as any big match. If you look at the possible arrival of Semeno through this lens, you can see how he fits this logic. He would not come in to be an untouchable star, but to fight with the wingers already there, with the midfielders who drift wide, with whoever currently has more game time. And this internal battle, instead of causing problems, is exactly what keeps the team alive. A forward who arrives knowing he has to show on the pitch, game after game, that he is worth the $65 million invested is not going to accept hiding in big matches. He is going to take players on, even knowing that if he slips up, there are 3 or 4 others ready to take his place. The same goes for Reinders. That discomfort he showed with his lack of minutes for the national team is not a sign of destructive dissatisfaction, but of someone who refuses to be a mere supporting actor. A player who is settled does not say a word, accepts coming on only at the very end, does the bare minimum, and goes back to his club as if everything were fine. Not Reinders. He feels he can lead, that he can start, that he can be more than just an option off the bench. And that mentality, channeled in the right way, is exactly what a team with ambition needs at that decisive point in the season, when fatigue, injuries, and outside pressure start to weigh. In Cherki's case, the logic is similar, but with an extra ingredient: rare talent. There are players you can replace mechanically, swapping one piece for another without changing the way you play too much. But there are some who affect the emotional structure of the supporters, the kind that make you feel something special might happen when the ball reaches their feet. Cherki is one of that type. And when someone like Dominic comes out and says he probably will not go to the World Cup, that automatically creates a redemption arc inside the season's narrative. He suddenly has yet another reason to use City as a stage for his statement of intent. Now imagine a scenario where, over the course of the season, these 3 stories move forward together. Semeno arrives and has to prove he is a big-game player. Reinders fights to turn his frustration with the national team into an undisputed starting role at City. Cherki plays every match as if he were sending a message to the France coaching staff. In parallel, on the outside, you still have former players, former referees, and rivals reactivating theories about 2012, trying, in some way, to take the weight away from that historic title. The result is a team living in a constant state of being put to the test, as if every match were a public trial. In this context, the club's role as an institution changes. It is not just a team going out on the pitch to win matches. It also becomes a kind of shop window, a sporting courtroom, where each player, with every performance, responds to the narratives being created around them. When Reinders dictates play in midfield and dominates a big game, he responds not only to criticism from the national team, but to the whole discourse that maybe he is not a player for the very highest level. When Cherki cuts inside, finds the top corner, or threads an impossible pass, he answers those who said others are ahead of him in the French football pecking order. And if Semeno at some point pulls on the blue shirt and decides a big match, he answers the debate about whether paying the release clause is worth it or not. And this is where you come in, City fan, as an active part of this story. Because it is no exaggeration to say that the atmosphere at the Etihad, the digital mood on social media, the way supporters respond to the press, all of that influences how these narratives gain strength. When the stadium get behind a player going through a tough spell, when supporters online defend a name that is being unfairly criticized, that does not go unnoticed. Players read it, families see it, agents keep track, journalists pick up on it. And that can be the final push someone needs to flip the mental switch and fully embrace the leading role the team needs them to take. Now think about the impact of all this across different competitions. In the Premier League, where City live under the demand to dominate the competition, any slip-up becomes fuel for those keen to push the idea that the cycle is ending. In the Champions League, where the margin for error is minimal, the individual confidence of players like Cherki and Reinders can be the difference between knocking out a European giant or going out by fine margins. In domestic cups, where it is often the players with fewer minutes who get more opportunities, someone like Semeno, if he is in the squad, can use those matches as a springboard to earn more space in the biggest games too. At the same time, deep down, the story of 2012 remains like a hidden timeline, reminding everyone that the identity of the modern city was born in a moment of chaos, drama, and contestation. It was not a title won in a dull match, with a comfortable 3-0 and early celebrations. It was secured in the last breath, in front of a stunned stadium, with their rival already celebrating the trophy somewhere else. That origin shapes the way the club deal with pressure today. It is as if in some way City were condemned to live in extreme narratives. It is either maximum glory or total contestation, and that is not necessarily a bad thing. This type of environment keeps everyone on constant alert. The hierarchy, the coaching staff, the squad, and the fans all know there is no comfort zone. When rumors appear about interesting release clauses, like Semeno's, the club move because they know it is not enough to maintain what has already worked. They must anticipate the next step. When a player shows frustration with limited national team minutes, like Reinders, City know they must provide an environment where he feels important. When a talent like Cherki is publicly underestimated, the club see the chance to turn him into not just a good player, but a symbol of a project that believes in those who are doubted elsewhere. In the end, all this draws a very clear narrative. City are now a club that live to prove points. They prove they know how to recruit, they prove they know how to develop talent, they prove they win titles on the pitch, they prove they can renew themselves without losing their identity. Every transfer window becomes a chapter in that proof. Every controversial statement about a player becomes another line in this story. Every record broken, every comeback completed, every trophy contested keeps alive the essence of that Aguero goal in 2012. The idea that even when everything seems lost or questioned, the teams still have an answer saved for the decisive moment. So when you hear someone questioning whether it is worth investing $65 million in Semeno, whether Reinders really is city level, whether Cherki is ready to be a leading figure, or whether there was something strange about the 2012 title, remember to put the pieces together. Nothing in the recent history of Manchester City is isolated. Transfer decisions, players' public comments, quotes from former referees and former managers, the behavior of rivals. Everything is part of the same construction. It is the story of a club that stepped out of the shadows, became a constant target for criticism, but did not stop growing, winning, and bothering those who would have preferred them to stay behind. And the big question, from here on, is how this next cycle will be written. Will it be with a new electric forward coming from Bournemouth to ignite the attack? Will it be with a midfield in which Reinders fully takes on the mantle of leader? Will it be with Cherki establishing himself as one of the standout players of his generation, silencing those who put him behind others in the queue? Or will it be with all of that happening at once, in yet another season where City turned doubt into fuel and contestation into motivation? City fan, if you enjoyed getting fully up to speed with everything that is happening behind the scenes, in the market and on the pitch, do not forget to show your support. Leave a like, because that shows you want more content like this, with analysis, inside information, and stories that go beyond the headlines. And if you are truly passionate about the citizens and want to follow every update, every possible signing, every controversy, and every decisive match, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. That way, you will not miss any video, you will always be one step ahead, and you will keep walking side by side with City through another historic season.